Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Lockie and with me is Ryan. So this is a podcast and it's for the entrepreneurial spirited amongst us. And in it, we distill ideas from the world's best thinkers in business, startup, psychology and other things, mainly in the forms of books and documentaries and stuff. Today, we talked about the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
There's no clickbait here. In this episode, we discuss the 6 ways to make people like you. We talk about Carnegie's tips for taking the ego out of situations. And we talk about how some things never change and how others stay the same, because this book was originally written back in 1936. We talk about this? Well, because relationships are life, and relationships put meaning and spiciness in life. So why not learn to be good at building them? Dale is also no longer with us, but you can find out more about him and his famous courses at dalecarnegie.com. And of course, don't forget, as with every episode, you can find full video from our episodes on YouTube and find our show notes and some other information on episodes at abstractable.co. We hope you enjoy the episode. And we're back, Lockie.
How you going?
I'm going really well.
Oh, that's good to
I'm
hear.
very hot. I'm very hot. And I take it that you are quite cool in Melbourne.
Yes. What's the temperature over there? Hang on. No weather talk. I'm killing it.
I was going to say, we've launched an episode with weather talk.
No COVID talk, no weather talk. Straight into it.
Tell us, Lockie. Tell me about something.
All right, so I'll tell you about something. I'm reading an excellent book. And
that sounds like a strange thing. You reading an excellent book.
Christy often says to me after I finish a book, I say, that's one of the best books I've ever read. She's like, you say that about every book. So I'm easily persuaded. But this one is a ripper. It's like
I've got all my books that I've read on Goodreads and they're all 5 stars. What do you do?
Yeah, that's it. Andy Warhol biography. I bought the hardcover just before going into lockdown. So it is 900 pages long. It's heavy to pick up, but man, I'm enjoying it so far.
You've got the hard copy?
I've got the hard copy, yeah. I've gone old.
No, I love old school. And is it loaded with his art and pictures of him?
Not so much. It's mostly words. Okay. It's got a middle section with his art in it, like one of those glossy bits. It's got some pictures of him, but mostly it's just like a normal biography. But what I am doing is it references a lot of art. It references a lot of different types of art and styles and this kind of different eras. And so I'm Googling it all at the same time and actually learning what some of it actually means. So
are you a bit of an art connoisseur, Lockie?
No, I know nothing about it. And so this is a good opportunity to learn.
So why'd you pick up the book too? What struck you with Andy Warhol?
Well, he's a pretty famous dude and he's pretty out there. And so I thought, well, it'd be good to learn about that. And I'm interested to learn a bit more about some really creative people. So I think it was Coursera. I got sent an email from MoMA, so the Modern Art Museum, over in the States, and they were offering like a free course on contemporary art, and it was really good. It was very basic, but really, really good, and gave a nice kind of rounded insight into some things, all of which I've probably forgotten. Yeah, it's definitely interesting because like around this time they were starting to really experiment with some out there stuff, even before. Like there's some of the stuff they referenced that was in like early 1900s that's still confronting today, like the blank canvases and things like that, that still people talk about, It's pretty cool. I'm enjoying it.
The move from realist art, where an artist would be trying to portray as realistic interpretation of what he was seeing, with then the invention of, with the introduction of different technology, e.g. the camera, leading it down the path into this, it's like, well, the camera's now taken everything we used to do for the kings and queens. We need to find something else to do. And it really just opened the world up. And that's where you see this explosion of abstract art and all the other various kind of forms of abstract art and the lead ups to abstract art. It's incredible.
Do you feel you're well educated in the art space? Is it an interest of yours?
Definitely an interest. Just don't know anywhere near enough about it to be able to ramble to you properly.
Yeah, no. Maybe I'll
get
there by the end of the book.
I do have a favourite. I think I'm a surrealist fan. And so Salvador Dali is, I think he's my favourite artist.
Really?
He's pretty out there.
The melting clock guy.
Yeah, the melting clock guy.
Very cool. Yeah. I don't know. I think, I always thought Warhol was my favourite because that's the only one I really knew. So.
Is that because you saw him in Men in Black?
What? He's in Men in Black? Come on.
I think he's in Men in Black. It's not the real Warhol. Just to clarify there, mate. He was, okay. I think he was long gone by the time that movie kicked off. But I think it was Men in Black 2 or Men in Black. Maybe it was Men in Black 3. I don't know. But there's like a scene of Andy Warhol where they're in Andy Warhol's apartment and they actually find out that Andy Warhol's an alien.
Yeah, okay.
Which it all makes sense. It's like, now I get the art.
Yeah, right. So, very cool. So tell me about what book we are actually talking about today.
Nothing to do with art. Although...
The art of conversation, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe the art of conversation. You're right. Or maybe the art of talking, I think was one of the man's early exposés. So we're doing How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
The original self-help book.
The original self-help book.
Or was that As a Man Thinketh the original self-help book?
Yeah, or Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, or something probably a couple of thousand.
Well, Seneca wrote a book on life or something, didn't he?
Yeah, The Shortness of Life.
Yeah, that's got to be close to a self-help book.
It's definitely getting into the space.
Or you could go back to Harambai or whatever in the Sanskrit that was talking about all the different... laws of living, but that's probably more religious.
Well, to some degree, that's like a pursuit of, the ultimate personal development, Lockie, hey?
The original personal development. Now,
the original personal development.
I'm pretty sure I absolutely butchered the name of that, but anyhow.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But let's just roll past it.
Let's keep going. So, Dale Carnegie, not to be confused with Andrew Carnegie, which is the famous billionaire or the richest man. Actually, I don't even know if he made it to technically $1 billion because inflation has totally whacked things out in terms of the value of money. But I was reading somewhere that he would be worth, in today's money, close to $1 billion. Close to $1 trillion. Let's get the zeros right. And he gave away something like $300 billion worth in today's money. So, he still had a lot of money, but
that's a lot of money.
He gave away a lot. Yeah. All right.
Hammurabi.
So, anyway.
Hammurabi. I Googled it. Yeah.
I don't even know if I've ever heard of Hammurabi.
It's like this really old sort of writings from Mesopotamia. So it's got some stuff about eye for an eye sort of stuff and this kind of things, I don't know.
Shit. This is back in the real, the real days.
Back in the day. Yeah, this is full on. So after the aliens came. After or before the aliens?
Now, well, Andy Warhol hadn't landed yet, so I don't know.
Yeah, true.
So he was born in 1888, this guy, in Maryville. And he was born into a family of impoverished farmers, basically. Money was basically non-existent. And I think we used the term dirt farmer in one of our previous episodes. I can't even remember which one it was now. You'll come to your mind soon, I'm sure, Lockie. But
it was recent.
Yeah, but one of your like your initial interpretation of what a dirt farmer was is what it sounded like on this farm. So they struggled. They struggled big time, and they didn't even just struggle for money, like to go about getting education and things. They struggled for money to even put food on the table. They were primary producers of food, and they were struggling to get food. So that this was tough times for them.
Yeah.
So
seriously.
Yeah, crazy. But I think this wasn't a rare thing. This is pretty prevalent, and so it's a sign of times changing. Certainly for a portion of people. But let's not get into that. So he was eventually throughout his, so he basically lived on the farm, worked on the farm, did the farm life, but he did eventually make it to college, and he couldn't afford to live where the college was, which was 3 hours out of where the farm was. So I'm assuming it was Maryville that he was commuting to, and just so happened that the farm was a 3-hour horse ride each way.
I was going to say car, but it wouldn't have been car, would it?
No. Well, he saw his first car at the age of 12, apparently, but he didn't get to see one until the age of 12. And I think if you'd been living in the city, you would have seen it, pretty quickly, given when he was born. But
yeah, right.
So anyway, he had to ride to and from college every single day, which is a 3-hour horse ride, because he couldn't afford to live in the city. There's just no possibility of him being able to live in the city. And so he would do that commute every day. He'd be wearing his clothes that he outgrew plus years ago because he couldn't afford to even buy a new pair of clothes. Because normally you picture like the clothes that you couldn't afford as being like too big, because you're seeing them on kids in when they're portrayed in the movies. They're like 3 sizes too big. But this is like beyond that. This is after those kids have grown up a little bit more. It was the picture in my head.
Right.
So anyway, he'd come home, he'd milk the cows, feed the hogs, and then after all the farm duties, etc., were completed, he would study by oil lamp until the wee hours of the morning. And then in winter, he'd have rude awakenings, like 3 a.m, because the baby hogs, unless they were kept inside behind the furnace, they would die during the night. So they wouldn't have the next season's production, because they were hog farmers. It's just
tough
crazy.
Life.
Yeah, crazy.
It's a real tough life.
And even with all that going on, they were struggling to get enough money to just subsist, So he was pretty down in the dumps, understandably, about his situation. And, he decided that in order for him to stop being ashamed of his situation, and also because he wasn't living in the city, he was seen as an outsider. And this is also thinking back then. It's also times that there was a little bit more potentially a little bit more judgment about someone who comes from outside your town.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm sure there's places that this still goes on, and so he felt like he needed to win something. He just didn't know what. He
Right.
wasn't very good athletically, apparently. So he just chose a speaking contest. And I don't exactly know why he chose a speaking contest, but he just
What is a speaking contest?
I've got no idea. I think you just need to give a speech.
Is it like a debate or yeah?
I don't even think it's a debate. I think you just like need to orate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's one of those things that's maybe faded a little bit in today's age. Mind you, we do have debating back. Did you have debating back in high school? Is that a thing?
Not where I went to high school.
Well, it's definitely debating it. I think there was debating. There was definitely debating.
I'd say so. Yeah. Like it's a thing.
It was a thing.
It's a thing.
But it didn't seem to happen at uni. Anyway.
Not for me. Not in engineering. I mean, if you did something in humanities, I'm sure you did a fair bit of like that kind of thing. But yeah, not for us.
So he decided, he set his sights on this speaking competition. I think it's because they get exposed. So like I think they used to get applauded or, cheered on. You think of like being in the audience of a speaking competition and people are like, yeah, getting on board the speaker.
Right.
So
he found his calling.
So he found his calling and, he got all excited about it and then started relentlessly practicing, endlessly with all his spare time that he had when he wasn't studying by all lamp. I think he was practicing on his commutes, on his horse rides, his 3-hour horse rides. And even when he was like feeding the pigs and different things is what I spoke about. And he just, with all this practice, he was time and time again. And so he became really depressed,
right,
and so under pressure from all the work he was doing on the farm, all the study he was needing to do, the lack of sleep, failing this one thing he'd set his sights on to try and win, and as well as the shame of not having money to be able to even afford to do anything or live in the city and have any friends. I think there was a point where he got to the point of wanting to commit suicide, which is just really, really sad circumstance. And the really sad reality of it is, in this situation, if he had gone further, this is like someone's life's work that you won't get to see potentially. And I just think about all the times, sorry to throw this down into a depressed state, but it's just, you think about all the potential times that happens. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, it's a big problem more than ever.
Cut short. Yeah, well, particularly at the moment, but we're not going to talk about COVID. So he won eventually. I don't know how it kind of happened. Stars aligned, and then one day he ended up winning one of these competitions, after just continuing these batterings. And after he won that competition, he basically didn't lose, and he won everything. It's almost like he was building this this pot of knowledge and this pot of, developing his craft. It's like he struck the 10,000 hours, mate, of, mastery, 10,000 hours. And so eventually people started actually begging him to teach them how to speak like he does. So he kind of eliminated a lot of these pillars that were causing him pain and anguish and depression, just with the one domino of winning, that initial couple of
got his confidence up.
Got his confidence up, yeah. And so then he finished college. He did a number of different things. Again, so when he finished college, he didn't continue on with the speaking stuff he was doing. He just he became a salesman. He started selling various things like courses. He started selling bacon and soap. Because he was a traveling salesman, essentially he'd have to use a freight train to travel places because he couldn't afford the tickets for the passenger trains. And he'd be training up to like 100 miles a day on these trains.
God.
Yeah. And
it wouldn't have been quick either.
No, it wouldn't. Yeah, it wouldn't have been super quick. And the other thing is, because times were tough in general, sometimes people couldn't even pay for the orders that they'd placed. So, which put him in a very difficult circumstance, because he would have to then make the order from his company to go, such and such wants all this bacon or all this soap or whatever it is, and then you'd rock up with all this soap or all this bacon or whatever, and they wouldn't be able to pay for it. So he'd have to, what he would typically do was he would basically trade some of their stock and then get some of their stock and then sell it off his own back, sell all their stock off his own back to other people, and then use that money to pay for the stock to his company. So he became a bit of a master salesman by the sounds, and he was reading all the books on sales, and he was also learning to play poker with Native Americans at the time, which is
This is such an adventurous life.
It's crazy. He did a lot of other things too. And like, for example, he joined World War One. He joined the US Army, and then he was stationed somewhere during World War One, and obviously had some experiences there. And then eventually, after World War One had ended, and he was actually working as a car and truck salesman, he decided he'd had enough of doing all this salesman work, and he really wanted to pursue this passion for writing. He didn't care about the money. He just thought, I've lived on nothing. Now's the time to pursue this passion. So he thought, how can I do this? And he said to support himself, he would teach in an, and he wanted to know what he could teach. He came up with public speaking. So then he had to convince YMCA, which was obviously a training centre at the time there, wherever he was living, to bring on a public speaking course. So he persuaded them to do it. And then essentially he spent the next 2 decades pursuing this. So he was doing his writing all during the day, and then he would do these public speaking courses of a night time. And that became his, very much the inflection for his life's work.
Yeah,
and
right.
So by, this guy that had essentially not been off the farm for, all of his childhood to some degree, by the 1930s, he had travelled. Remember, he was born in 1888. So he had travelled to Hong Kong, Hammerfest, into the Arctic, all kinds of, crazy, crazy experiences.
It's really cool.
Yeah. So then there's 1936 rolls around, and that's when he released his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the book of today. And during his lifetime, it sold 5 million copies.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. So we've obviously skipped there was a lot of stuff that went on during his, the crafting years, but, a lot of it was just spent gradually iterating up his courses, gradually iterating up his books. I think he's written 11 books and many, many, many booklets, like mini books for his courses and things.
So on his courses, it was in Snowball, the Warren Buffett biography, that this is like a pivotal point in Warren's life, doing one of Dale Carnegie's courses. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I actually just brought up the quote. He said, "I don't have my diploma from the University of Nebraska hanging on my office wall, and I don't have my diploma from Columbia University either, but I do have my Dale Carnegie graduation certificate proudly displayed. That $100 course is the most important degree I have." So fairly pretty good praise from a fairly successful person there.
Sounds like he was like an early Tony Robbins or something,
Yeah, I mean, it's even the title of his book and some of the stuff in it is just super clickbaity.
Oh, it is.
Like,
it is. It was clickbait before clickbait was even considered being a thing. Before the person who coined the term was fucking born.
Yeah, he was already doing it. So,
and so, well, to give you an idea, mate, on the kind of marketing perspective back then, there was a course that he did in like 1935, and in the New York paper, the newspaper, he literally just had an ad that just said, "Learn to speak effectively," and then the next line was, "Prepare for leadership." And this was the time that 20% of the population, because of the great 20% of the population was on government support, and huge unemployment, not enough money, but the course was just absolutely jammed to the rafters. And he ran multiples of these courses. So
yeah, right.
This is before everyone was keyed into the idea of clickbait and not to listen to it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but anyway, he's clearly done wonders, and he's spoken in front of the royal family during his life, and he built out this big training institute, which is where Warren Buffett ended up doing that course that you spoke about. So 1955, he died of Hodgkinson's disease, and at the age of 66. But since then, there's been an estimated 30 million copies of his books sold, which puts it in the absolute top echelons of non-fiction books of all time.
Stratospheric success. Yeah, what an interesting story.
Very interesting story. So tell me about the book, Lockie.
Well, the book itself, kind of its title tells you kind of what it's about.
I wonder if we sucked anyone in with the title today. I wonder if anyone was like, I really want to influence and make some friends.
Yeah.
Win friends. Sorry, it's not make friends, it's win friends.
Yeah, which again is it's weird, but hey, it's from back in the day. But there's obviously a lot of gold in this, and I think the idea of a lot of the stuff in the book has kind of just become part of normal. I wouldn't say normal, but it's like very known rules about interacting with people that everyone kind of takes for granted as something that you've grown up with. It came from this book, that was something I noticed when I was reading it, and it would have definitely been quite revolutionary when it was written, but it's still got a lot of application. There's some things that also probably don't work anymore, I think.
I'm really interested to hear that. Yeah, okay.
So it's basically broken up into four main parts. So the fundamental techniques in handling people, and these are just kind of some really high-level rules, like don't criticize, condemn, or complain, give an honest and sincere appreciation of people, and arouse in the other person an eager want.
Can you translate that into 2020 language, Lockie?
No.
That last one.
Well, I think that the last one is the one that's tricky. But I don't really know what that means truly. I mean, I think it means, I suppose, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, it's like you make the simple version is make others want something. But like the underlying current of that is make others want something that you also want.
Yeah, because why I'm confused about this is this part, and this probably comes back a bit later in the book, I think, is that about motivating what's inside the person inherently, or putting on them a feeling of, I suppose, what you want, insert that motivation through your words in someone else and bring it out of them. That's the thing. I would say it's probably the former. I think that his ideas really aren't about forcing things onto other people as such. It's more about kind of avoiding, a lot of it's kind of about, if you're going to have conflict, do it in a clever and more subtle way than just being a battering ram, I think is probably part of it. Like I'd say he invented the shit sandwich from what I could tell reading this. The compliment, the bad thing, and then you end with the compliment.
I love the old shit sandwich. Didn't they get like myth busted by someone? Don't know. I'm sure it did.
Probably. So next, 6 ways to make people like you.
So hang on.
That's some clickbait.
Hang on. So just I had a quote prepared for the arouse in another person, right? And I will read it out because it can sound quite manipulative. So he says, looking at the other person's point of view and arousing in him, because they only really refer to him, I think back when the book was written, an eager want for something is not to be construed as manipulating that person so that he would do something that is only for your benefit and his detriment. Each party should gain from the negotiation. So I guess he sees every interaction as a negotiation.
Yeah, it's a win-win thing. And then so the second part's really about relationships and connecting with other people. The third bit, how to win people to your way of thinking, is more around negotiating, I think. And the fourth part's about leadership. How to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. And I'd say my comment around that was kind of how to lead in a subtle way. And his concepts there, I think, kind of remind me of kind of the idea of coaching now that's quite popular. But then some of them also struck me as avoidant, which I don't think works as well now. So we can crack into that.
I tend to agree, mate. But the thing that really struck me, so I read the 1936, I think, version of the book. Sorry, no, I didn't. That's a lie. I read the 1981 version of the book. Mm-hmm. So there was like a big overhaul done to the book which was released in 1981, which is apparently the one that people say to read. I'm not sure why. But you read the 2000s version.
Yeah. So that was the version I read, and it's quite a bit more up to date. So it's got kind of references to the internet and social media and things like that, among other more relevant examples, but it still runs the same, it still runs through the same kind of chapter structure and talks to the different concepts.
Yeah, because one of the struggles that I had going through the 81 version was, it wasn't just the examples, because you can see an example. It's like, if he's referring to like a typist, dealing with your typist in the office and giving them some criticism on a mistake on misspelling a word or something, like they're totally irrelevant today.
Yeah, don't just fire your secretary. Give them encouraging words.
Yeah, but like it really framed up how much times have changed, since when this book was written. But I felt that you could then immediately you could very quickly dismiss some of the ideas. But I felt that once you kind of dug a little bit deeper into what was actually being said, a lot of it still had a lot of applicability to today.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, look, and my earlier comments are not to be construed as there's nothing good in this book. It's absolutely packed with the fundamental rules of sort of building relationships. And I think if you're any sort of management, leadership, or if you're a business owner, business is relationships, I reckon.
Yeah, totally. Really, you struck on something earlier, Lockie, about there was this real avoidance of conflict. And I think certainly going back decades ago, that was much more pronounced. I think people were just generally less direct. Like you read, there were some letters throughout the book and they were just talking around things. Like they're talking very, obviously with much more eloquent language than what we probably use today in writing an instant message across Slack to someone. But
how good are letters from back in the day? They're like poetry almost, you know. We lost all that. We never, you know. Now we're basically going back to hieroglyphics.
Emojis.
We're regressing.
We are too. And we put no thought into them either. We just send a couple of emojis, and it's like the emojis are representing emotions that we're feeling because we haven't thought about it at all. See, being back then, also the value, like the price of paper was also a lot higher, and you probably paid more attention to how much of that you were using and wasting.
Interesting.
Something to bear in mind. So, one of the things that has clearly faded is this like indirectness, and so there was a few principles throughout the book, like call attention to people's mistakes indirectly, ask questions instead of giving direct orders, and the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. So, I think there's still some truth that can be gleaned from these, but I also think there's like, if you are too indirect with people, particularly in this today, people don't read between the lines as much. You read some of those letters and they're almost cryptic. You're like, I don't even know what he's pointing to as being the problem here.
It's funny because that's now what some people have that problem when cross-culturally when doing business with Japan and China. That's that their business culture or culture in general perhaps is much more subtle.
Yes.
But the US in particular is more blunt, isn't it?
It very much is, yeah. Well, that was one of the big things out of Shoe Dog when Phil Knight was dealing with the Japanese. He had to he didn't even understand what was even happening in his negotiations initially. You couldn't, and they would walk out of the room as though no deal had been struck, and then a couple of days later he'd find out that they had struck a deal. He's like, "Oh, we did strike a deal." It's
very different.
Crazy. Very, very different.
But for him to be, for this book to be, well, let me put this to you. There must have been, because he's talking about doing more, being a little bit more indirect, being a bit more, don't call people out in front of other people, criticize in private, praise in public, sort of. So for this book to have landed in the way it did, those things must have been relatively new. So maybe there was a lack of subtlety around the way people dealt with others. But if it was, they were just screaming at people perhaps or something like that,
Yeah, I think, well, it feels like things were generally more indirect, but when you moved into an organisation, there was this very hierarchy.
Yeah.
Very hierarchical in nature of it. Yeah.
It's like much, respect you for the boss and all, deference.
Yeah, and everyone like even like a level above you, there's just this absolute, servitude basically to those people.
Yeah, it's a good point. And well, let's crack more of the specifics of some of his ideas and we can kind of have that lens over it as we go. I guess for me, to pick out the 6 ways to make people like you.
Bang.
As horrible a title as that is, I think it's to me, this is probably the best bit of the book, I reckon. I mean,
tell me, Lockie, since reading this, have you made some people like you?
I hope so, because it's getting pretty lonely over here. So let's see how we go. So, I mean, a lot of these are very kind of somewhat obvious, but they do have quite a deeper kind of meaning. But so first one, become genuinely interested in other people. So in a conversation, care more about what the others, or, than talking and trying to impress someone yourself. And he kind of talks to the fact that, people are inherently self-interested and you want to feel important. It's like part of your emotional need as a human. But it always reminded me of this thing I'd heard about Bill Clinton, where an English journalist had an encounter with Bill, and I think she perhaps also had an encounter with his opponent. But she said of Bill, he made you feel for those short moments that you were this is probably pretty creepy now that when you think about Bill, but let's go with it anyway. He made you feel for those short moments that you were the only woman in the world that he'd ever met, and he'd never met anyone as interesting or as lovely as you. I'm sure he did that to a lot of people, but he's known as a very charismatic bloke. And then I think in another way, kind of, they were saying, when I walked away from talking to his opponent, I thought that he was the most interesting person I'd ever met, but Bill made me feel like I was the most interesting, is kind of the moral of that story. And, people who are genuinely interested in you, you feel a connection to.
I think the word you've hit on them, Lockie, is genuine, because people might, you might read that on like in a personal development course or something, or, one of these big headlines, show curiosity in other people, or you might get might have a training session at work about how to manage others. And it's like, show curiosity in your employees or something like that. But you see the kind of half-assed curiosity. It's like, I'm just saying this because I know I need to say this to kind of break some ice here. And that's like a counter. It's like it pushes it back even further the other way. It like creates a resentment around it.
Yeah.
So it needs to be like from horrible. A genuine place.
Yeah. So like,
yeah.
But it feels kind of almost weird talking about this in a way, because it's like, it feels kind of disingenuous to say, yes, be interested in others. Okay, I'll switch that on. Like you've either got to have it or you don't you? But anyway,
I think, okay,
you can put more effort into it, right?
Let's bookmark this just for a little bit later, because I want to come back to that. All right.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to hit you with number 2. Smile. So I love this one, and I think it's really underappreciated, particularly at work, is that people just, we've never been busier, apparently. Certainly the amount of stuff coming at you is full on. The world's moving quickly. There's a certain confidence it takes to smile at someone else and not be so serious, particularly at work. And I love that. I think it's awesome. And I think that not enough people do it. And it's something I'll try and remember not to be so, not that I'm super dour, but try and keep the fun, and it puts people at ease. And it's interesting. You can even kind of hear it in people's voice when they're smiling. There's a lot to it, I think.
Yeah. The example he gives in the book here is about picturing, just picturing like a baby. When a baby smiles at you, there's no bullshit in that smile. It's like, you can imagine like a big grin on a little baby looking at you. It's nothing but pure joy. And he says, that's a smile. It's not this kind of like this thing that you've like almost had to put like a couple of hooks in the side of your mouth to draw up on you, or had like plastered on or Botox into your cheeks. It's like a real smile.
People that smile a lot have friendly faces. I actually think that it kind of does something to your face.
Probably gives you wrinkles in the right direction, It's like these micro wrinkles in the right direction. Everything's kind of facing upwards.
Yeah.
But our brains are like hardwired for smiles, mate. Like if you smile at someone versus if you frown at someone, if there's no words or anything, you're totally hardwired around how you feel off the back of that situation.
Well, this was in Thinking Fast and Slow too. That they did experiments where people do frown and furrow their brows and then do another activity versus smiling, and there's different effects that it has on just the way you think, which is, I mean, there's so much we don't know about all that, but it seems to me that it can't be anything but a good thing.
So just a nice little quote on the smile, mate. Your smile is a messenger of your goodwill. Your smile brightens the lives of all who see it. To someone who has seen a dozen people frown, scowl, or turn their faces away, your smile is the sun breaking through the clouds. That's from the book.
Jeez, it's full on. Number 3, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. How do you go remembering names?
I am terrible. I meet someone and the name has bounced off my ear. It didn't even go into my ear. It bounced off my ear before it even went in.
It's hard. I don't know why. It's like, I'll remember this person's name and then bang. Have you got any tricks?
I know that there's... See, I never forget a face. Like, never, ever forget a face. Or what someone looks like, or where I've even where and how I've been associated with that person. But for some reason, the name just disappears into the dark reaches of my memory. Clearly, sometimes, particularly when you put on the spot, like you're passing by, Johnny, who you haven't seen in 16 years, and you're
just
like,
call him mate,
how are you? And then you can have a whole conversation just sent mate.
Yeah.
And depending on how you say mate, and as long as you don't delay it, I think you can make it sound like you haven't forgotten their name. And then just wait for someone else to bring it up.
There's no doubt knowing people's names is very powerful.
Yeah, but it's not the way to their deepest and farthest reaches of their heart.
Mate.
As Carnegie would say.
So it was an interesting example. I used to work at a company called Fulton Hogan, and there was a guy who worked there called Jules Fulton, and he was, I think, the grandson of one of the founders, or maybe even the son, I'm not sure. And everyone had every reason to hate this guy, like kind of born into the royalty of the family sort of thing.
Were you one of them, Lockie?
No, it's more like, particularly in Australia, tall poppy syndrome, he's obviously absolutely minted. And, I was in this training with a heap of labourers and myself and a couple others, and Jules came in. Everybody loved him, and he just went around to everyone and asked them how their kids were by names, how's this, how's your property, how's this? And I was like, okay, this guy understands people, and he just genuinely gave a shit. And it was so nice to kind of experience that. And kind of something else that struck me on this kind of line was one of my business partner, John, his sister worked at Australian Super, and I think she left the job. I'm not sure why. Got another one or something, and on one of her last days, she got an email from the CEO. This is a big company, and she'd met this guy once.
They're like Australia's biggest super fund, I think.
Yeah,
or close to it.
And she'd met the CEO once, and he wrote an email saying, "Look, really sorry to see you go. I enjoyed, meeting you, and I wish your family all the best," and this sort of thing. I'm just like, man, that's classy, And I've told like 20 people that. So, it certainly struck a chord with me. I don't know why, but it's those kind of, it's actually caring, isn't it? It's pretty basic, but that sort of effort's very uncommon, I think.
Yeah, you've got the time to go out of your way to wish people well.
Or even to remember who they are.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, correct.
For someone at that level who might have 1,000 employees or something.
Yeah, or probably more than that, mate. Yeah, totally. Okay, so because we're now seeing, this things become more connected, and we're dealing more on digital platforms and things, like Slack, like Microsoft Teams, all of those. Do you think we're getting maybe better at remembering people's names or not? And the reason I wonder is because you're always seeing their name pop up. It's always Lockie and then a face of Lockie next to it, assuming you're not the person who puts just like a cartoon of yourself on your profile.
I'd say yes for that, but there's still so many encounters with people that you're not in that kind of circle with that I'd say it's not enough to kind of close the gap, I don't think. Yeah. So next one, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Very similar to number one. But I was wondering, at what point does this need to be balanced out? Because I feel like I actually don't talk about myself too much and avoid when people ask me questions. I'd rather talk about them. But I actually think that I've found that limits connection in many ways because I'm not letting them in enough or telling stories. So what's the balance here?
Okay. So I think, mate, I think the lens of this book is very much from like a business, not just running a business, but like building a business or selling or something like that. And it just seems that that's the way, because that's his experience. His experience is very much from like a sales perspective. He's been dealing with people, big corporates and all that stuff, or people that have maybe passing moments. It's like a 2-minute interaction with someone. And so I think there's that lens that runs through the book, and so I think that as a principle, when you've come across someone that you haven't seen in 10 years, rather than you taking up that entire 2-minute interaction just talking about, how you bought a new car last week, and rather fan out about their life a little bit more, I think is great. And I think that's a great little thing to do. I think what you're maybe talking about is maybe on deeper relationships with people, maybe people you might be with every day even, then I think that's totally, I think you're totally right. It's almost like, mate, like arguably it could be to the point of being selfish even,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
To not share more inside.
Yeah.
Sorry to call you out on microphone, mate.
No, that's fine. I'm happy. You're not really following the rules, but that's all right. We're going with the more Ray Dalio version.
You'll give me an indirect berating later.
That's right. You can
write me a letter.
Yeah. I'll get a typewriter or something. Last two, I'll breeze through them. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. I'm a big fan of this one. Figure out what people are in and find out about it, because it's cool to learn about, and that's what they love talking about. So it can really spark up a conversation. And lastly, make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So very, very common thread running through them, but still as true today, I would have thought, as when they were written. Yeah.
I tend to think, mate, that the thread that runs through all of them is all this stuff needs to be genuine. And the only and I feel like the only way that you can be genuine is if you're a little bit less self-interested. You know, and to be a bit less self-interested means you need to like be more in touch with yourself and reduce that ego, essentially. Because if you're asking someone a question because you've learned it in a management course, but in your head, you don't even see yourself thinking about it in your head, you're saying, I can't wait to start telling him about this car I bought last week, then it's not going to go well, because you're not really listening, or you're not really asking things, or you're not really smiling at them. So there's nothing worse than fakeness, I think, is one of the big things that comes out of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've got a question then.
Okay.
So when you look at a group photograph, who is the first picture you look at?
I reckon I look at myself.
I have a sneaking suspicion everyone does. I'm just going to make a blanket statement there, and that was a question he posed in the book. But even if you have had a dissolution of your ego, so you've been enlightened through some extreme Buddhist practice, I still think that enlightened person is still going to look at their own self first, even if it's just a glance, just for that second.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
no doubt.
And so that's like that idea that you were talking about before, that there's nothing that you can do. Every single person is always going to be the most interested in themselves. I think, and so like it's like you're eternally interested in yourself, and what you really want. So that's the reality of it. So I think in order to like get past that, there's like a journey of dealing with coming to some of these more, or just coming to the realization of having an ego, and so this starts to get spiritual, and then a little bit, starting to move into like the woo-woo of meditation and presence and mindfulness and all these things, which are now starting to really spike their way up in certainly in Western society, but have been around for eons in Eastern philosophy. And so I think there's a path to take there, putting that ego aside a little bit.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of selfish to talk about the other person because it will benefit you in the relationship. So it's kind of a win-win because the other person's going to enjoy talking about themselves for the most part. And you'll also win on the back end because you'll build a strong bond with them. So it's kind of an interesting, it does kind of, you have to put aside the first order consequence of, that internal need to be relevant to get that relevance that you want in the sense of influencing the other person. I think that's kind of what he's saying in there, in a way.
Yeah, and there is like a contrived feel that runs through a lot of this stuff. But I think if you part ways with that, just for a minute, like you park that at the door, and if you started to actually do some of this stuff in your day to day, I think and it just becomes, eventually it just becomes, this is your immediate reaction. It's second nature.
Yeah, it comes down to intent too, I think.
Yeah.
I reckon that in many ways, if you come at this with an intention of trying to build better relationships with people, which is like the spice of life effectively, then that's all right.
Like spicy.
Spicy life, Arnold. But if you're actually, use kind of how to use it to manipulate others, then it's got a lot more of a sinister feel.
And I think people are more tuned in than the ones with malintent realise. The only challenge is the ones with malintent maybe don't get called out enough, you know, or with a kind of, it's that fake intent. Like if you see like someone that's a few levels up in the organisation, and they ask you this fake question. Gee, it sounds like I've got a real chip on my shoulder here this episode, Lockie.
Been burnt a few times by the boss's boss, have you?
Yeah, and so you just got to.
Do you want to talk about it?
We can talk about it. We can talk about it later. And I think like there's no reason someone shouldn't just call that out then and there. It's like, well, do you actually want to know, or you don't? Imagine that as a response. Jeez. That'd be great,
wouldn't it? Or you just start talking about something really random to see if they're actually listening, you know?
Yeah, well, I think I've been in situations where someone's like asked you that question, and then like in the motion of like reaching into their hand, into their pocket to like pull out their phone, and they've only been, they haven't been listening at all, but they're really not listening by the time they've kind of reached in and pulled out their phone to like bring it here or bring it up to here.
Sometimes I have to say I'm not good at this because I'll want to know at the start, but then I'll be so stressed about something else that I'll drift off. And it must make the other person feel terrible, you know. And it's it's a weakness that I'm a bit of a daydreamer sometimes.
Yeah, like you kind of start abstracting out other thoughts.
Yeah, or worrying about something or that kind of thing.
Do you think that's like a symptom of our like scatterbrain age? You know, like scatterbrain technology driven, we're skipping from one thing to another. Like, do you reckon back when they were penning letters to one another, this was as much of a problem? Because I think that's pretty common, Lockie. I suspect a lot of people do that. Perhaps
it's hard to know. I mean, the weird thing about those times, whenever I read about like Benjamin Franklin or, one of these old school biographies, is like, you just, like, I'm worried if I don't hear from, if you didn't hear from your partner for a day, you'd be like, what's happened? Where are they? Are they okay? People would go away for months and not hear from their significant others or their families, or they'd receive a letter that their child had died or something because, infant mortality was so high back then. But you couldn't just fly home to be with them. There's this real feeling of the unknown. What's happening. We don't really suffer from that much anymore.
Well, okay. So here's a personal example of that, right? Recently. So because we moved overseas just before COVID happened. We've brought it times now. Just before COVID
disease
happened.
Disease that won't be named, that shan't be named. Yeah.
I ordered a SIM card because I wanted to keep my old phone number. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I'll just get it express mailed across to France from Australia. Mm-hmm. And obviously, COVID struck, and the short story of it is it took 6 months to get here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right, is, at the end of the day, I didn't really care. Like it actually, I was surprised how little it mattered in the end, because you've still got like Wi-Fi access, so you can jump on, you can do phone calls over Wi-Fi, whatever. But like initially being so annoyed about it, I was like, this is unbelievable, that this is happening. Whereas this was just part of the day-to-day life, As you said, people would be hearing about their son or daughters killed in war via a letter that was sent 3 months prior,
Yeah.
It's completely different perspective.
How do you feel when you're on a plane? So your phone doesn't work, you're on a plane. What's the feeling?
Relief.
Me too. So there's something so nice about being on a plane and not having access to the internet. And I noticed that on a recent trip, you could get access to Wi-Fi. I think it felt like the first couple of minutes were free, or you might have had to pay for it straight up, but it's creeping in. And I'm just like, I don't want that. This is the one place, this tin box we're flying through the air, where I have no choice but to just not deal with this. At every other point, the stress is almost that you can, but you're not. But in the air, there's just no choice.
Yeah, there's no choice. I like that. I really like that, yeah.
So I wonder if that was how I felt in some ways.
So, yeah, and then there's the challenge. How are we going to go when we've got, the global net or the global Wi-Fi set up, which is, the big missions of Facebook and Google and, all the other companies on the same mission. I think Virgin's doing it as well.
It kind of feels inevitable, doesn't it?
I like the idea of, I've heard of like Sundays, and something we're trying to do a little bit more is spending your Sundays disconnected.
You're bringing back the Sabbath.
Yeah, the Sabbath.
Is that
Sabbath Sunday?
Yeah, I like it. They were onto something.
Yeah, I think they were. This is back to that religious conversation we're having earlier, Lockie. So bringing this back onto the tracks. There was quite a few principles throughout the book that were focused on ego. So like one of them was, if you're wrong, admit it quickly and empathetically. So it's like, don't just dismiss it as, that was wrong, move on. It was, I was genuinely wrong there,
Yeah.
What can I do? This is a big one from our man who gets named every episode, Taleb. He loves this. He thinks that all people should do this when they are wrong.
Does it?
Well, I've seen him do it. So
yeah, okay, all right.
He says that people should do it in public. If they fuck something up, they should publicly shame themselves.
I feel like this is PR. Wow, this is the biggest PR lesson that people could take who are celebrities or something. It's like immediate sincere apology kills pretty much the whole thing to some extent.
Yeah, it's like it completely, like, yes, it might cause a little spike in some of the reactions that you might get. You might lose a couple of fans, but you stop the forest fire. You stop the burning press for the next 6 months talking about nothing, talking about this random conspiracy theory or whatever it was. I totally agree with you, mate. The other principle was let the other person save face. So, instead of you reprimanding me here on air about me calling you out earlier, do it off air, Lockie. It's a much better way to do it. It makes me save face, helps me save face.
I think this one's important because I've often felt like I'm too soft. But I think this book's given me a little bit more confidence in my approach. Like, I often feel like if someone's made just a mistake, they don't really need you to double barrel them for it. If there's some kind of willful negligence or unethical behaviour, I mean, you're kind of talking about something different. But most of the time, they know they've stuffed it up.
Yeah, one of the big notes that I found when I was going back through the book, just going back through my notes, one of the things I kept seeing written was like, except for the wrongdoers, you know, people who are like intentionally causing harm or being negligent or something like that. And they're the ones that you should definitely call out, I think. So I think there's almost like this focus on like garnering relationships with people. And then if there's people that are trying to cause chaos, or willful evil and things, then call them out.
100%.
So the last thing was just about being genuine. So it's about there's the reducing of the egos and there's doing it genuinely. And there's a quote in the book: flattery is counterfeit, and like counterfeit money, it will eventually get you into trouble if you pass it to someone else. So
it comes from I kind of get what he's saying there. So should I hit you up with the closing quote?
Hit us up, Lockie.
Okay. All right. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you.
I love it.
Good one to remember in the social media era. So
less social, Insta story posts today then, hey?
Well, I mean, got to keep the followers happy. All 12 of them. So love you, 12. Thank you. So on that note, don't forget, actually, before we sign off, that you can find all the videos of these episodes. So we actually record videos for those listening. So check it out on YouTube. It's actually starting to build into quite a big body of work on there, which is kind of cool and we're pretty excited about. So check it out. And we've got a website too at abstractable.co, which we're still kind of working on, but it's coming together. So check it out.
Thanks, guys.